The so-called housing market recovery is really nothing more than an illusion. Let me start by making two claims. The first, I don't think it's a wise decision to buy a house either to live in or for investments right now. And the second is that some homeowners should consider selling their house now before they lose whatever equity is in it. At the end of the housing bubble, prices began to level off in 2006, and then in 2007 they started to decline around the country. Things got really bad quickly, and in 2008 and 9, prices were falling everywhere, nowhere worse than in the places where the speculation was greatest, like Phoenix, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, most of California, and much of Florida. Foreclosures just kept rising as prices were tumbling, and then by early 2010, the lenders and the mortgage services panicked, and they said, we have to do something to stop the bleeding. So they decided to sharply reduce the number of foreclosed properties that they would put on the market. They just decided they weren't prepared to take the losses on these expensive homes, so most of the foreclosures were $200,000 and under, and the other expensive properties were simply left to sit. The question is, what finally turned the housing markets around the country around? Things were really bad in 2010, and did this solution work? Not really, because throughout 2010 and 2011, foreclosures continued to grow. They actually peaked in 2010 with over 1 million foreclosures. Nowhere was this worse than in California and in LA. So through 2010 and 11, foreclosures continued to rise, prices continued to drop, and the servicers decided that we need to do something more drastic than what we've been doing so far. So starting in early 2012, what they did was actually reduce the number of properties that they repossessed and put into foreclosure. This really began to make a difference, especially in Los Angeles, which was, you might say, the epicenter of this whole madness. And by 2012, at least in LA, prices began to turn up. But that wasn't the case for the rest of the country, especially in the rest of California and Florida, which was just a mess. But they continued to close the spigot, so to speak, so that, for example, in LA in 2012, there were only 25% of the foreclosures that there had been in 2008, which was really the peak of foreclosures in California. By 2013 and 2014, the foreclosures almost stopped completely, and the servicers began to see that this was actually working. If we keep these properties off the market and we don't foreclose on them at all, then this could turn around prices, and very gradually in 2013 and 2014, around the country, prices slowly began to increase. The important thing that I want to point out is that this had nothing to do with any kind of economic recovery. The housing market turnaround was done because of these actions taken by the lenders and servicers to do something about this foreclosure mess. Now, what about these strategies taken by the lenders and the servicers? Did they work? Have they worked? I would say yes and no. They did keep a lot of these properties out of foreclosure. They didn't put them on the market, so it had that kind of a positive effect in terms of prices. But there was another big problem. There were so many delinquent homeowners that hadn't been put into foreclosure that they had to decide, what do we do about them? Just reducing the number of properties that you put into foreclosure wouldn't be sufficient because new delinquencies were arising all the time. And so for them, the solution that they decided on was to modify their delinquent mortgages. Here's another problem that they had to deal with. During the bubble, there was over $2 trillion of subprime mortgages that were originated. These were poorly underwritten and they were really a disaster. Very quickly they started defaulting in droves, and several million of them have already been foreclosed. There are something like roughly $800 billion worth of these subprime mortgages still outstanding. Is that many of these subprime mortgage borrowers haven't paid a nickel in the last 5 years. Take a look at the columns. You'll see that just a year ago, in some of the worst states, half of these haven't paid a nickel in the last 5 years, and this problem continues. And if you take a look at the states, yes, they're the usual suspects, but you'll see on the bottom that there are some states you wouldn't think that they had such a delinquent problem, but they do. I have seen reports where some of these folks have not paid for 7, 8, 9 years, and the servicers simply let them sit. We're talking about several million of these mortgages still outstanding. Now you may ask, well, wait a minute, Keith, how can a couple of million mortgages take down major housing markets? That's a fair question. And my answer is simply that the problem that we're facing today goes well beyond just the subprime mortgages. During the craziest period of the bubble, some 20 million homeowners refinanced their first mortgage. But it wasn't just, you might say, big deal. People refinance all the time. But these, what became known as cash-out refinances, were different. The homeowner wanted to tap the equity, the growing equity in their home. So what they did was they took out a new first mortgage, they refinanced the old one with a larger first mortgage, and they took the difference between the two in cash. And that became known as a cash-out refi. And it was, if you think about it, it was like money falling from the sky. And in California, nothing was crazier than there. You could pull out $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in cash because of the growing value of your property. The lenders were more than willing to shovel it out because they thought the prices would go to the sky. And what happened when home prices leveled off? Millions of these homeowners, especially in California and some of the larger metros, New York City and Chicago and around the coast, but it was nationwide, they found themselves with a much larger mortgage, and when prices began to turn down, very quickly the property was underwater. They were underwater and they started defaulting in droves. And that was one of the main reasons why the mortgage servicers decided we have to modify these millions of mortgages, otherwise this price collapse will just continue. You would think that with all of these solutions that would solve the problem, but it didn't, because almost from the beginning, millions of these modified mortgages started redefaulting. The homeowners, for some reason, whatever it might, they decided that my house is underwater and I can't really afford the mortgage, or I have no intention of repaying, and so they started redefaulting. Some of them have redefaulted 2 or 3 times. If you take a look at this next graphic, this is from Fannie Mae. You can see that the number of redefaults as quickly as a year after the modification is increasing between 2012 and 2016. So the situation with the redefaults is getting worse. A second redefault, the chances of redefaulting, a second modification, is greater. So this problem, you have to understand, is getting worse as we move forward. My view is that there really is no solution to this massive problem of redefaulting modified mortgages. We're talking about millions of them. If that's the case, then at some point, many, if not most, of these modified mortgages that are redefaulting will eventually have to be foreclosed and liquidated. And when that happens, then it will really hit some of the major metros hard, and prices could actually begin to decline. I hate to use the word, but again.